Can AI fix a divided America? The answer might lie in its power to find common ground, spark real conversations, and rebuild trust. Let's explore how this tech could deliver hope.
Okay, so we're diving into all this material you sent in. It's about this question. What gives people hope for the future of American society? I mean, especially right after an election that felt super divisive to so many. It seems like you guys are really looking for those actionable insights. Luckily, you've given us tons to work with, research articles, even personal stories. So are you ready to get a little optimistic?
I think what's really cool is we might actually start by busting a myth. This myth that we're all just hopelessly divided. Turns out there's research from Monica Guzman that shows most Americans actually have way more in common than we realize.
Really? Because, all I see is those crazy extreme viewpoints clashing all over social media. Is it possible we're getting a totally warped view of how divided things are?
Yeah, I think that's totally possible. Think about it. The media loves conflict. It gets more clicks, more views, But Guzman, who wrote I Never Thought of It That Way, she's a journalist, and she points out that focusing on these extremes can really mess with our perception of reality.
So it's like we're looking in a funhouse mirror, right?
Well,
all distorted and exaggerated.
Exactly. And those distortions, they have real-world consequences. Guzman talks about research that shows people always think conversations across the political divide are going to be way worse than they actually are.
So they go in bracing themselves for a fight, but then end up pleasantly surprised.
Pretty much.
That is encouraging. So maybe instead of assuming the worst, we should try being more open to those conversations, even, or maybe especially, with people who have different views.
That's one of the big takeaways from Guzman's work for sure. And it's not just her either. Tanya Israel, she's a professor at UC Santa Barbara. She also found that a huge majority of Americans are just plain tired of all the division. She calls them the exhausted majority. And they're the ones who want compromise, they want nuanced discussions.
Hey, want our free AI dope top AI tools that we use? Chat below. It's our live Google Sheets packed with over 100 killer tools, video, music, photos, AI voices, productivity, script writing, YouTube hacks, captions, the works, always growing, live Google Sheet, always free, AI, dope top AI tools that we use. Download and chat below. Back to the show.
Okay, so now we've got two sources saying maybe we're not as polarized as we think. But how do we actually bridge those divides? It feels like everyone's stuck in their own camps, just shouting at each other.
Well, this is where Tammy Pfeiffer's work is really helpful. She created something called the Dignity Index.
The Dignity Index, what's that all about?
Basically, it's an 8-point scale for rating how we use language during disagreements. Think of it as a tool to move away from what Pfeiffer calls contemptuous language, insults, mockery, dehumanizing people, and toward more dignified communication.
So it's like a roadmap for having better, more respectful conversations.
Exactly. And the best part is it's not just some theory. The Dignity Index is actually being used in schools, businesses, even government agencies.
Wait a minute, are you saying there are politicians actually using this index to be better communicators? That's got to be a first.
It might sound crazy, but yeah, people are realizing that how we talk to each other really does matter. And the Dignity Index gives them a practical way to shift to more respectful and productive dialogue.
Okay, color me intrigued by this Dignity Index. But let's be real here, some of these divides in society feel huge. How do we even begin to tackle those? Are we talking about getting families from opposite sides of the political spectrum to have Thanksgiving dinner and just hash it out?
Well, maybe not Thanksgiving dinner right away, but there are definitely ways to bridge those big divides. And Mark Friedman and Eunice Lynn Nichols have a really interesting perspective on this. They talk about something called cogeneration.
Cogeneration, is that like some futuristic way to power the political divide?
Not quite. In this context, cogeneration means collaborating across generations. So it's about getting people from different generations together to solve problems, share perspectives, learn from each other.
So instead of focusing on what divides us as generations, we could use our different experiences and knowledge to find solutions together.
Exactly. And here's what's really cool. Friedman and Nichols found that Gen Z, the youngest generation, they're actually the most excited about this whole cogeneration thing.
That's really hopeful. I always hear that younger generations are just glued to their phones and that they don't care about connecting with older people.
Yeah.
Maybe they're just waiting for the right opportunities,
I think that's a great point. And there are already some amazing things happening out there, things that are helping connect different generations. Like Citizen University's Youth Collaboratory, they've got young people working with older adults on social justice issues in their communities.
So it's not just theory. We're seeing this co-generation in action.
Absolutely. Another awesome example is Stoop stories. They use storytelling to connect generations and build empathy. And then there's Third Act. They're all about getting older adults involved in fighting climate change. And they work in partnership with younger activists.
Wow, those are really inspiring examples. Sounds like there's a growing movement to bring generations together
Yeah.
and use everyone's wisdom. But I'm curious, what's driving this desire for connection? Is it just a feel-good thing, or is there something deeper going on?
That's where Niobe Way's work comes in. She's a developmental psychologist, and she's done some fascinating research on social emotional development. Her findings suggest that connection is actually hardwired into us. It's not just a nice bonus, it's a fundamental human need.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more about what she found.
One of her most interesting discoveries was about adolescent boys. She found that contrary to what people think, boys, especially when they're younger, they really want deep emotional friendships.
Seriously, that goes against everything we usually hear about boys, that they're all about competition and never showing their feelings. You're saying they actually crave those deep connections.
Yeah, it might seem surprising, but Way's research shows boys are just as capable of empathy and being vulnerable as girls. The problem is, as they get older, society tells them to suppress those needs.
So we're basically training boys to fit into these narrow boxes of what it means to be masculine. And in doing that, we're stopping them from reaching their full emotional potential.
That's exactly Way's argument. And suppressing those emotional needs has all sorts of bad consequences. It can lead to loneliness, isolation, even aggression.
This makes me think about all the men in my life. My dad, my brother, my friends. Have they been taught to hide their true selves? And what would it take to create a world where they feel safe, showing their emotions?
Those are really important questions, and I think Way's work points us towards some answers. She believes that we all have the capacity for empathy and understanding, but we need to build a culture that actually nurtures and celebrates those qualities.
So instead of telling boys to man up and hide their feelings, we need to encourage them to embrace their full range of emotions and to build those deep, meaningful connections with other people.
Exactly. And that doesn't just apply to boys, it applies to all of us. We need a world where being vulnerable is seen as a strength, not a weakness, and where connection is valued above everything else. I think that's the foundation for a future filled with hope.
This has given me so much to think about. We've already covered so much. From this idea that we're not as divided as we think, to the power of the dignity index, to the importance of generations working together, and this basic human need for connection. It feels like we're building a case for hope, brick by brick.
I agree. And I think the next piece of the puzzle might surprise you. It comes from science fiction writer Annalee Newitz.
Science fiction. How does that fit into all of this?
Well, Newitz argues that joy and genuine connection can actually be forms of resistance, especially when we're constantly bombarded with fear and division in the media.
Okay, now I'm really curious. What does she mean by resistance in this context?
She's talking about resisting the narratives of despair and cynicism that are everywhere these days. She believes that when we choose joy, when we connect with others in meaningful ways, we're actually pushing back against those forces that want to divide us and make us feel hopeless.
So it's like an act of defiance. Instead of getting sucked into all the negativity, we choose to focus on the good, on the things that bring us joy and remind us that we're all human.
Exactly. And she has this great example. On election night, when everyone was glued to their screens, doom scrolling through all the updates, Newitz decided to do something different. She had a backyard party for her friends and neighbors.
A party? On election night? That's not exactly the typical response.
I know, right? But that was her whole point. She wanted to create a space where people could connect with each other in person, share food, laughter, and support no matter who they voted for.
That's such a powerful image. Instead of letting the election divide them, they chose to come together and celebrate their shared humanity.
Exactly, and I think that's the heart of Newitz's message. It's about actively creating those spaces, both online and offline, where authentic connection can happen. It's about choosing joy and connection as a way to resist the things that are trying to tear us apart.
This is giving me so much hope. It feels like we're being given permission to step away from the screens, to step away from all the negativity, and focus on building real-life connections that actually make us feel good.
And you know what? It doesn't have to be some big grand gesture. It can be as simple as having coffee with a friend, calling a family member, or joining a group in your community. It's about making those small, intentional choices to prioritize connection over division.
So instead of feeling overwhelmed by all the bad stuff happening in the world, we can choose to focus on those little pockets of joy and connection. like planting seeds of hope and watching them grow one interaction at a time.
Exactly. And those seeds, they have the potential to create a ripple effect, spreading outward and transforming our communities, our country, and maybe even the whole world.
Okay, we've explored some really inspiring ideas so far. But is all this talk of connection and common ground just wishful thinking? Is there any real evidence that we can bridge these deep political divides? The ones that feel so ingrained in our society?
That's a great question, and I think the work of sociologist Arlie Hochschild offers some really valuable insights here. She spent years immersed in communities that are often stereotyped as being super divided, and what she discovered might surprise you.
Okay, tell me what she found.
So Hochschild went deep into Trump country, specifically Louisiana. She spent time with people who have very different political views than her own. And what she found was that even in these communities that seem so polarized, there are often these surprising examples of empathy and people trying to build bridges.
So it's not as black and white as the media makes it seem. There's more nuance and complexity to these divisions.
Absolutely. One of the most powerful stories from Hochschild's research is about a man named Mike Schaff. He's a former addict who became a counselor, and he works incredibly hard to bridge racial divides in his community. And here's the interesting part. Schaff is a strong conservative.
So his political beliefs don't stop him from fighting for racial justice and building bridges.
Exactly. And this wasn't just a one-off thing. Hochschild met tons of people who defied the stereotypes. She even met a pro-Trump businessman who is all for renewable energy.
Wait, hold on. A pro-Trump businessman supporting renewable energy? That sounds like a total contradiction.
It might seem that way at first, but when you dig a little deeper, you realize that people's beliefs are often way more complex than just their political labels.
So those labels can actually stop us from seeing the full picture, from recognizing that we might have more in common than we think.
Exactly. And Hochschild says that common ground can often be found in unexpected places. She points to climate change as an example, where there's actually a surprising amount of bipartisan support for certain policies.
So instead of getting stuck in all that partisan back and forth, we could focus on those specific areas where people from different sides might agree and work together.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most hopeful things about Hochschild's work. It reminds us that even when things seem totally divided, there's always a chance for connection, for understanding, for building a better future together.
This is giving me a lot to think about. It's like we've been given a map to find hope.
One thing that's certain to affect us all, AI is changing all of our lives. Click this next video where we explore why the pace of AI advancement is faster than anyone predicted and how this shift impacts you.